Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. I have to admit that I thought I was done with this kind of video on the Electoral College when I did my last one 3 weeks ago. I didn't plan on doing another until my actual prediction video, which I have slated for just before the election, so hold your bated breath for that. I had a Senate status video planned for last weekend, but that was before the race in North Carolina got upended by a sexting scandal. I'm still waiting on polling for that one before I finish it, so we'll see what happens there. As for the presidential side, so much has happened since the last one that I kind of felt compelled to do another, because there are some suggestions that the race has taken a very sharp, unequivocal turn. If you're new to the channel, welcome, and I ask that you please consider subscribing. If you're not new, thanks for coming back, and yes, I am working on an election night video as we speak. Well, not right this second. I'm kind of busy at the moment, but I'll get back to it soon. In the time since my last Electoral College video, the president went nuclear during a debate on national television, complained about and talked up stimulus negotiations on Twitter, got sick, got taken to the hospital, got sent home, announced the end of stimulus negotiations on Twitter before restarting them on Twitter, and went nuclear on the next debate's format on national television, which has now been canceled. So, full circle. Oh, and polls came out in a quantity known in professional circles by the technical term, a shit ton. That said, only some of them reflects the impact of everything I just mentioned. Keep in mind with what I'm about to talk about that the race was beginning to tighten leading into the debates, and that last video did acknowledge that fact. To call the time since some of the most eventful of the election is a bit of an understatement. Thus, you get another status video. As always, we begin with the states colored in as safe. As a reminder, these are the states that nothing short of an October surprise scandal is going to change. They may be closer than usual or a bigger blowout, but I just don't see them flipping from where they are right now. So if you were hoping I was going to say the District of Columbia or Wyoming would be competitive this election, I'm afraid I'm the bearer of very bad news. As you can see, former Vice President and Democratic nominee Joe Biden leads President Donald Trump by over 120 electoral votes when you just count the safe states. Now, it's important to note that in 2016, Donald Trump won all but 2 of the remaining states and districts, those being Nevada and Minnesota. It's also important to remember this is kind of normal for most Republican candidates in recent history because most safe states for Republicans are smaller states with fewer electoral votes. That leaves us with 19 states and 2 congressional districts. Let's get started. Michigan was supposed to be a close state. It's not. The president famously won it by less than 11,000 votes out of 4.5 million votes cast in 2016. Trump has led in a grand total of 3 polls since Biden clinched the nomination. There have been 85 polls done in Michigan since then. Oh, and 1 was tied. Don't want to leave that out. The only reason this isn't a safe state is Biden has never gotten his lead over 10 points, but he's really close. Likely Democrat. Kansas is a bit of an enigma. Polls show an incredibly tight Senate race this election, but the president has led most of the way, outpolling the GOP Senate candidate. That said, the state is usually a how much over 20 points will they win sort of state. There have been a number of articles published of late referencing internal GOP polling that reportedly has the Republican Party scared witless. But internal polling is talked about with a purpose. Usually because someone wants something to go public. If true, it suggests that they see Kansas as the canary in the coal mine, and honestly, the president's steady high single-digit lead is not in the norm. It's still likely Republican, but the fact it's not safe yet is a screaming red flag for the campaign status nationwide all by itself. The news media has practically made a cottage industry of talking about New Hampshire having the smallest margin of any state back in 2016. That's why it may come as a surprise to a number of you that it's not close. In fact, it's so not close that it's nearly safe. All polls released over the last 3 weeks, and there were 7 of them, have Biden ahead by anywhere from 8 to 14 points. But it falls just under the threshold I have of double digits to be considered safe. So, likely Democrat. Montana, like Kansas, flirted with a tightening race over the summer. The state Senate race also started close, but unlike Kansas, there has been movement in both contests as the president has begun to pull away, likely Republican. Arkansas should be boring. The Senate race is so wrapped up the Democrats didn't even bother to run anyone. There hasn't been a lot of polling in the state, but what little polling has taken place had a surprisingly close result. Well, close for Arkansas. History has the president winning in a walk, and without a Senate candidate to drum up additional votes, I don't see the Democrats changing that without a lot more polling favorable to Biden. It can't be safe, but it is very much likely Republican. Missouri's former status as a bellwether has been much discussed, including by yours truly. So has its switch to being a red state starting in 2008, although honestly, it was probably earlier than that. Early in the summer, there was some evidence that might be changing, but it has since reverted back to its normal as the president has started to pick up his numbers. The idea of Missouri going for Biden was always a bit of a stretch, but that idea is going away quickly, likely Republican. Nevada was a state the Trump campaign honestly thought it had a chance at this election. It was closer than it has been all millennium and was the first time since 2000 that the winner picked up the state without a majority of votes. It also took Hillary Clinton being on the ballot for all of that to happen. She's not on the ballot this time. And while polls suggest the president has made some inroads nationally with minority voters, this state is not indicative of that, considering its high Hispanic population and the fact Biden leads by an average of about 6 points, or over twice Clinton's margin in 2016. Plus, they have voted for only one Republican since 1992, George W. Bush, twice, likely Democrat. Alaska is still a bit of a shocker. The state has voted once, let me repeat that, once, in its history for a Democrat, and that was almost 60 years ago. It's unknown whether the Senate race, into which it was just announced the GOP will dump millions of dollars into, is the driving force, or whether the president just isn't popular there. What is known is the state's polling is closer than anyone has ever seen. Trump has led in every poll, but when you consider his biggest lead was 6 points, that's another warning sign for the campaign overall. Still, Alaska is likely Republican. Minnesota has been a Democratic stronghold for decades, but something is happening within the state. As with much of the country, rural areas are splitting dramatically from their urban counterparts. This has always been the case, but as cities become more liberal and rural communities more conservative, that gap is becoming more of a chasm, and it's affecting states like Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. Minnesota, however, still has its roots in liberalism and has more liberal icons than you can shake a stick at, making it likely Democrat. That said, Minnesota's lead of the mid to high single digits for Biden is a far cry from the blue team's heyday, where the Democrat could count on basically a double-digit romp to victory. South Carolina is another surprising state that should be locked up by now, but it's not. Obama was the last Democrat to finish closer than 10 points, and right now, Biden has been closing the gap. Also benefiting the Democrats is a hotly contested Senate race that is shockingly close for incumbent Senator Lindsey Graham, but the president is outperforming him and still maintaining an average lead of over 5 points, which is the threshold. Likely Republican, but if southern states like Florida, Georgia, and North Carolina continue to be close, this one could become very interesting in a hurry. As I mentioned, Pennsylvania is another state like Minnesota with a very large schism developing between its rural and urban areas, although I probably shouldn't say developing, considering it was all the way back in 1986 that James Carville is famously misquoted as calling the state Pittsburgh and Philadelphia with Alabama in the middle. Like many misquotes, it's a paraphrasing of what he actually said. There is even a name for this area, Pennsyltucky, a term that's been around for over a century to describe the T-shaped area that makes up the non-Pittsburgh and non-Philadelphia areas of the state. It's something I'm personally familiar with because I live here. It is this area that delivered Trump his victory in the state in 2016, one of the narrowest margins in the country. While the president's popularity in the area has resulted in a large chunk of all new voter registrations in the state going to the GOP, the suburbs that used to be GOP strongholds are flipping, more than making up for the loss of Obama-Trump voters who seem to be permanently moving to the Republican Party over social issues. Biden has held varying leads since he won the nomination, but he's almost always led. In fact, the last time Trump led was all the way back in July, by 0.7% in a partisan poll. Biden has led in every single poll released since the last video, 30 of them in all, with leads ranging from 2 to 13 points, but most were in the 5-point and up range, which is enough to make it likely Democrat. That brings us to 268 electoral votes for Joe Biden, 2 away from victory, and 125 for Donald Trump. I'm not going to drag this out with it being this close because I can tell you that polls in the 2nd congressional districts of both Maine and Nebraska, which hand out some of their electoral votes by congressional district, show sizable leads for Joe Biden, officially giving him the 270 electoral votes he needs for victory. As I said at the beginning of the video, the race took a stark turn in the time following the first debate and the president's diagnosis. The rest of this video will be about how much it's gone in Biden's favor over that time. On to the leans. Wisconsin just missed being a likely. While Trump won the state back in 2016, polling of late has shown Biden with about a 5-point lead. However, polls just prior to the debate showed the lead down to around 3 points. That lowered the average just enough to keep it out of likely territory, but Biden is again beginning to climb, making it a very solid leans Democrat. Last video, I commented that the trend line in Florida was favoring the president. After a rough summer, Trump started closing the gap in the Sunshine State. While Biden still led, his leads were dwindling going into the first debate. A good first debate could have flipped the state back toward the president. Then the debate happened. There have been 13 polls since then. Trump has led in one of them, and Biden's leads have climbed yet again. One also tied, but the remaining 11 were all Biden all the time. Leans Democrat. Arizona has been polling very solidly for Joe Biden since he locked up the nomination, but there has been movement towards the president. While he's led in all but a few polls, that has changed from Biden leading in all of them over the summer to his leads having dropped down below an average of 4 points. Although Biden is still ahead, making it leans Democrat, it is trending back towards Trump and is a state to watch. North Carolina is clearly getting a lot of attention. It's the most polled state in the country, and it's not even close. For example, Trump has led in 7 polls since mid-August. I know that sounds impressive, but you have to realize that's 7 out of 42 polls, also known as he's losing in 83% of them. Biden has led in 7 of the last 8. The other one was a tie. And Trump's largest lead of those 7 was only 2 points. Those are some pretty damning numbers, making North Carolina leans Democrat. Texas, the new kid on the block for swing state status, has been crazy consistent since July, with neither candidate ever averaging more than a 2-point lead. But anytime Biden seems to take a small lead, Trump takes it right back. There's a saying in statistics that numbers will almost always regress to the mean. And if that's the case, the mean would seem to be a small Trump lead. Leans Republican. Ohio is another state that is strikingly close. Trump won the state by 8 points in 2016, but those kinds of leads are long gone. The two have traded leads of late, and the Biden camp is beginning a full-scale push for the state. This is one state where the Democrats' financial advantage may actually be a factor, as the Trump campaign went dark with its advertising in the state this week, as well as in Iowa, all to divert funding to Florida. Campaigns do this for 2 reasons. They think they're way ahead and don't need to spend any more money, or they think money is needed elsewhere. He's not way ahead, making this move very telling about the state of the race. Biden continues to close in, but the president's leads are usually bigger than Biden's, and he has more of them. In fact, he's led in 2 of 3 polls released in the last couple of days, so leans Republican for now, but this state is completely up for grabs. Georgia is the most fascinating state to watch in the election right now, as it appears to be in the midst of the convulsions of an ideological flip. It has a presidential contest that's been close, but with a definite advantage for Trump, and 2 Senate seats are up for grabs this election. One where 2 Republicans led most of the summer, and another where an incumbent Republican senator appeared to have a razor-thin lead. Then September came and all hell broke loose, especially in the presidential race, where Biden suddenly started leading in more and more polls, culminating in Biden ahead in 5 straight polls in October. A poll released yesterday has the president with a 1-point lead, but it's clear that over the last month, the state has trended towards Biden. I still think the president has a shot at winning this state, but over the last month, the narrative has changed, and if Trump is going to win Georgia, he needs to change that narrative back. Ever so slightly leans Democrat. Iowa remains the closest state in the nation. Polls have averaged leads of less than 1 point since summer, and there is no indication that's going to change before Election Day. Most of those leads have been for the president, but as mentioned above, his campaign pulled their advertising to shore up in Florida. Right now, Iowa leans Republican, but even the Trump camp knows it's much less important than Florida. I started the video by saying there had been an unequivocal turn, and there you have it. The president's performance in the first debate clearly caused a drop, almost across the board, even in states he was and continues to lead in. Followed by his diagnosis, that drop has continued. And while it appears to be on the verge of leveling off, the drop was precipitous enough in a few important, close states that it's pushed Biden towards landslide territory at 351 electoral votes to 187 for Donald Trump. Most striking is how the Biden camp has seemed to manage to put almost the entire eastern seaboard into their range. If Democrats really are competitive in a majority of the Sun Belt states rather than just the Northeast and West Coast, and that does seem to be the case, there is a major danger sign there for the Republican Party. So does all of this mean Biden has the election wrapped up? No, it's too soon to say that. Many of the states that flipped recently remain close and could go back. This is simply what the polls suggest would be the result if the election was held today. Of course, it's not being held today. However, we only have about 3 weeks to go before Election Day. Still, there is a very old saying that a week is a lifetime in politics. North Carolina's Senate race demonstrates just how much things can turn on a dime in a campaign. And honestly, the president's health does as well. That said, there are only just so many opportunities for a candidate to turn a campaign around. By refusing to participate in a virtual debate, the president has effectively eliminated one of those opportunities for himself. Biden is in the proverbial catbird seat. It's not to the point where he can run out the clock, but he would be wise to change absolutely nothing and stay the course for the next couple of weeks. Trump, on the other hand, would be wise to stop doing things like skipping debates if he really does want to make a race of this.